From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the Library of Congress. I'm John Cole. I'm the director of the Center for the Book in the Library of Congress, which is the reading promotion arm. We represent books, reading, and literacy on behalf of the Library of Congress around the country through affiliated state centers for the book and also through nonprofit organizations that we consider to be reading promotion partners. We were created in 1977 by legislation under the leadership of Daniel Borston, and through the expansion of the national program and now new activities here at the Library of Congress, we're doing what we can to keep books, reading, and literacy alive. One of our major activities is the National Book Festival, which has been on the Mall since 2001. In which the center and the entire library plays a role. In fact, we now call it the Library of Congress National Book Festival, and it will be again in late September of this particular year. We also have Books and Beyond talks, and we're pleased to have you here. These talks are featured talks about new books that have some kind of a special relationship to the Library of Congress. Often they've relied on the Library of Congress's resources. Sometimes they're a result of a Library of Congress project. Often it's a combination of Library of Congress resources, projects, and a co-sponsorship with one of the Library of Congress offices, and that is the case today. The publishing office is the co-sponsor of this talk, and we're very pleased that together we can also welcome C-SPAN, which is filming the talk, along with the Library of Congress itself. All of our Books and Beyond talks are videotaped for later broadcast on LC's website, and we have over 200 of the Books and Beyond talks available on the website. We also have over 700 of the author talks from the National Book Festival on the website. So we are pleased to be a resource for contemporary American writing and contemporary American affairs as reflected in books. Because of course, above all, we are celebrating the result, the book that is a result of research and the projects at the Library of Congress. Today, we not only will have a talk, but as is the case usually, we have a book signing that will take place starting at about 1 o'clock. Because our talks are being filmed for the website, we want to alert you that in the question and answer period after Henry's talk, we hope that you will have questions. We know he'll have answers, but by asking your question, you're also giving us permission, if we so choose, to include your conversation and your question and answer session with Henry as part of our broadcast. To start us, though, I am pleased to get, and also I must remind you to turn off all things electronic. Thank you. Our talk will be introduced by Ralph Eubanks, who himself is a son of Mississippi, and he has gathered a number of both Mississippiites and friends for this gathering, and I wish to thank Ralph for helping us with our audience as well as the co-sponsorship of the publishing office. Let's give Ralph Eubanks, the head of our publishing office, a round of applause.
Thank you very much, John. When I was an undergraduate at the University of Mississippi, the riot that took place during the integration of Ole Miss by James Meredith was fleetingly referred to as the incident. The bullet holes in the walls of the administration building, which is known as the Lyceum, were patched in a way that the incident could be forgotten rather than remembered. Still, I knew that the bullet holes were there and that they were important, and I knew why they were there. When I walked by them, that pockmarked wall of the Lyceum, I often thought of James Meredith, and I knew that what he did there made my presence there possible. Today, I say without hesitation that an Ole Miss education made it possible for me to do what I do today. I often tell people that Ole Miss did more for me than it did to me. And I'll also note that Ole Miss no longer refers to the riot as a mere incident. Today, they call it what it was. It was a riot. Rather than running away from that turbulent piece of our history, today we own it. That's why I'm very pleased to co-sponsor this program and to introduce Henry Gallagher today. As the officer in charge of James Meredith's security detail back in 1962, Henry had a special vantage point about that time in our history. And it was a very turbulent and special time in our history. His first-person account gives a very fresh view to a moment in American history, a moment that shaped me and every Ole Miss graduate who followed James Meredith. So, without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome Henry Gallagher to the Library of Congress.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, John. And my gratitude to the Library of Congress for hosting the event. I'll try to put into 30 minutes what happened to me 50 years ago with some reflection. This is my 10th book event since the book was published in September, and each event is different, each audience is different, each of the questions are different. I was a 23-year-old ROTC second lieutenant from a small liberal arts college in Minnesota, sent down to Mississippi along with 15 or about 19,000 other federal soldiers to quell the riot, to put down the riot. I was not aware of what we were doing, where we were going, because the Kennedy administration had put a clamp on public disclosure. And not until we got to Memphis were we aware of our mission. It was such a delicate, uncomfortable effort by our U.S. military, and it was a military, oftentimes I've said it was an army out of place. It was not our mission. Military police had the mission sometimes to put down domestic disturbances, but they occurred once every 100 years or something to that effect. Clearly not the mission of the 82nd Airborne or the 101st or even the Marine Corps, who were present that morning. 19,000 troops. 2 units had prepared, had been given advance notice of what they were doing, and they prepared for it in riot control. Why all of this for one African-American student who wanted to get an education at his brand-name university? It's because the whole state was in an insurrection, from the governors, from the State House itself, down to the 11-year-old who were throwing bricks at us in the street. It was total chaos, total mayhem. Even the Mississippi Highway Patrol had pulled away, so there was your insurrection. It lasted 2 or 3 days, the violent part of it, and then after that I was appointed to be the security officer for James Meredith, and went to school with him, or he went to school. I stayed outside with a hand-picked patrol, 3 jeeps, 12 soldiers, and we were there throughout the year. We transferred back and forth. The Army was in place for almost a year until he graduated in August 1963. I was 23 years old. I grew up in an all-white neighborhood in South Minneapolis. Johnsons, Swensons, Petersons, Bergströms, a few Murphys, a few Italians, but that was pretty much it. And so it was an eye-opening for me, but again, we were trained, and I am so proud of what the Army did. When you write a book, and this is my first, the publisher has the say on what the title should be. I had called it Mississippi Morning, because when we woke up, it was 6 o'clock in the morning, tear gas had passed, sun had come up, it looked like any other small town. It was an awakening, but it was also an awakening of the culture. The University of Mississippi would never go back to its old days. But the publisher comes along and wanted James Meredith to be in it. The book is not about James Meredith. So often book titles, the subtitle carries the story, and it is a soldier's story. An army out of place, yes, but again, they did their job. I saw pieces of violence after that first morning, but then we moved into somewhat boredom to the point that even he himself, James Meredith, an eccentric character, but a brave character, sort of chafed at being guarded as we would guard him, not moving him around from point to point, as we were advised by John Doerr, my iconic hero, civil rights hero, first assistant in the Civil Rights Division, and Nicholas Katzenbach. He was to have as much freedom as any other student. Well, yes, but at the same time, there are deer hunters, and it was the season, and we were constantly aware who might come up onto the campus, didn't look like a student, had a bent mine and a deer rifle, and we had to be constantly aware of that kind of threat to his life. He was a brave person. I was sitting in his dormitory room the first couple days reading the hate mail, the death threats, and they're very accurate, very detailed. James, we know where you live. We know where your parents are. We're going to kill you. We're going to kill your twins. And I looked at James and I said, have you read this one? He looked back at me. He said, Lieutenant, I'm late for my Spanish class. Let's go. That kind of bravery stayed with him, and that kind of courage stayed with him throughout my association with him. He never cracked. He never blinked. The students blinked. I should say that 99% of the student body went about their way getting an education. They cared little about him being on the campus. To them, it may have been an annoyance. We were the annoyance for the students. There was a handful of students who would go wherever he went, every corner. Here comes a nigger. Go back to Africa, you black bastard. We're going to get you. We're going to get you. And that stayed on through October, November. But it lessened when I came back in the spring. The racial attitudes were still there. He always reminded me that it wasn't just the students yelling out. It was their parents, their grandparents, the legacy of the separation of races in that state. It was there then. It's to a certain extent. It's there now. 50 years later, we have an African American president. And the night he's reelected, there's a disturbance on the campus. It should not be blown up. Many of the headlines the next morning said racial protest at Ole Miss. Well, it was not. It was a group of students who didn't like the results of the election, but just a handful of them were throwing out racial slurs, screaming. So that has to be in context. Ralph alluded to Mississippi today. There's an expression, Mississippi was, Mississippi is. It means they've changed. They've changed in a way that I think a lot of the northern press was not aware of then of the racial issue, and probably not aware now. The Army had been, thank you, Harry Truman, the Army had been desegregated to a point by the time I got into 1962, it was flattened out. There may have been racism back in the barracks and the tents, but it was not out in the open. Alabama PFCs saluted black officers, took the orders from black sergeants. Once we left the comfort of the Army bases and the posts as we moved south, it was a different culture that we got into. And of course, it was a freeze frame, a photograph, a snapshot of racism that we saw that first morning and continue to see while we were there. So kudos to the military. They did a good job. My driver one time asked me, Lieutenant, what are we doing? Are we doing any good down here? And this was late November. I said, well, he's still alive, isn't he? The only way I can respond to that, to a direct question. But that answer to that question was enriched and embraced 50 years later. I was in Jackson, Mississippi earlier last month on the fifth of 6 book events. William Winter Archives, downtown Jackson, middle class, mixed race, African American, white audience, maybe 30 or 40. I told them the arc of my story, and then we went into a question and answer period for about 20, 30 minutes. a little bit of a larger room than this here. It was an African-American woman about the second row back was sort of fidgeting, and I knew she wanted to say something. I wound down. I said, "Are there any more questions?" She shot her hand up. She said, "Yes, I want to say something. I don't know how I can say it," but I said, "Go ahead, ma'am. I think I've got enough nerve to say it, but I want to thank you for coming." I didn't know if she meant that morning or 50 years ago. She had said, "Let me tell you my story. I was growing up at Vicksburg. Daddy told us that night to stay in the house and stay away from the windows. There was trouble out in the street, not a lot of noise out in the street. It was not a good time for blacks in Vicksburg. It was not a good time for blacks to be in the state of Mississippi. That weekend, I had faith in only two things: God and the United States Army." That moment, I grabbed the podium. She started tearing up. As I tried to respond, I started tearing up, and there was obviously a murmur of approval throughout the audience. So she stood up, pointed her finger at me, and she said, "Thank you for coming. I came over here 50 years later to say that." And she sat down. It was worth everything. The book tour, I have a university press. They don't pay advances. I go to hotels, I pay for the airfare, pay for the hotel, pay for everything. Because I want to get the message out. I want to get young people to know about what happened 50 years ago. But that poignant moment answered the question that my driver asked me 50 years earlier. "Sir, are we doing any good down here?" So I'll never forget that moment. Putting a book together like this 50 years later, it is in the first person, because I wanted the reader to to be with me, but almost be ahead of where the protagonist is. The protagonist did not know where he was going. We were not told. The reader now has some idea of what was happening, not until our planes arrived in Memphis that next morning to an airport, to an Air Force base, to a Navy base that had more landings, I think, than O'Hare Airport had that morning. It was busy. The Kennedy administration did not want to lose out on this one. Anyway, when you're appointed to be a security officer in such a situation, you keep notes. You keep notes, and they're blasé, their telephone numbers, license plates, names of people who are, today we call them persons of interest, people who didn't look like students. Every night I had to report to the FBI for anyone that might have come into Oxford and checked into a hotel that didn't look like he belonged there. So I kept those notes, and then I looked at them over the years. I started this book 10 years ago, and I started talking to people who were in my unit, and they provided me with anecdotes. And I looked over old newspaper sections. I looked over magazines. Started piecing things together. Ken Burns says you look at a photograph long enough, the photograph comes to life. The person that has a life before that snapshot and has a life after it, and you begin to, again, put things together. So you take a photograph of some of your buddies that were at the camp down there, and you start looking at it. Then you make visits to the campus, and you start trying to retrace your steps. So that's what became the book, and I connected all the dots. And I had a lot of support. Some of you were in the room here to keep pushing this thing. If I don't, I will sign books after this event. If I don't have a familiar inscription for you, I will put down, once you're done reading this book, please pass it on to a young person. Again, this happened 50 years ago, but it happened yesterday morning. Racism is still there. It's still in Mississippi. It's still in our society. But they have made great strides. They, the university. Governor Winter's Institute of Racial Reconciliation, foremost proud of that. Bringing books, bringing people, bringing speakers to the University of Mississippi. I brought myself a few people down. Mark Shields, a columnist here in town, went down with me 3 years ago, and he had an interesting comment. He said, "You know, the Northern Liberal looked at the civil rights movement as a laudable event, noble movement, until that movement started moving north." And then the texture of the comments changed. That's pretty much my story. I don't want to tell you the story. I want you to buy the book so I can pay back some of those airfares and hotel bills. But again, it's something I want young people today to know about. Racism is still there, but the Army played a significant role 50 years ago, and I will never forget what that woman told me. Thank you for coming. Great. Any questions, please? Lionel.
Well, I actually was going to ask this question a little later because the same question that you were asked, are we doing any good here, is what I asked you in Vietnam when we served there together in the late 60s. And never knowing of this chapter in your life, and you gave me a pretty nuanced answer. There were many shades of gray in Vietnam. It wasn't black or white. Fun of any kind, and learned a lot from you, and never knew the whole time that you had done this as a young man. So I salute you and thank you for being a mentor, trying to answer that question in a minute later. Great.
Thank you. Thank you. Please, a gentleman in front of Lionel.
I'm wondering two things. One, why you decided to do the book so much later, and two, if you had any specific training in the Army for this kind of duty before you went down there, or were you kind of waiting?
It took a while to write the book. I had a law practice here in Washington for many, many years. I did keep notes, and I felt ultimately that I would put it together and I'd piece it together for a magazine article. And then it expanded, and it became what it is right now. But always in my mind, I want young people to know. I want young people to know that this ugliness happened. And so it took a while. My brother is a writer up in New York. He was my editor for a while. I fired him 3 times. And I went back with the help of my wife back into my first year of legal research because I had to authorize, this is a piece of nonfiction and you have to put down. I thought with a memoir you could just wing it. Well, you can't, because once you start highlighting things, you've got to get authority for it. You even have to get consent from people with who you put photographs in. You need the consent of the Army, consent of all that. I had a letter from James Meredith right after I left, which is in the book itself, and I wanted to put that in. My wife reminded me, well, you need his permission. I didn't need his permission. He sent it to me. But he didn't send it to the world. So I sent a formal letter down to Jackson, Mississippi. He signed it on the back side of the envelope. He said, it's about time you got your book out, 50 years later. So it took a long time. Yeah, it did take longer than I thought it would. But again, piecing things together, U.S. News and World Report, Saturday Evening, Life Magazine, Look Magazine, all those helped me support my story. And it was the story, again, of a protagonist that didn't know what was going on, but I put notes in the book so the reader knows what's going on. And the poor 23-year-old second lieutenant hasn't a clue until we get to Mississippi and to Memphis. Sir, your second question, I'm sorry. Training. No. The military police are trained for POW, for prisoner control. Prisoners, foreign prisoners of war are our own people. Taking them back and forth from the jail to court appearances, things like that. But never protecting, never bodyguarding something. So we had no starter kit. We just winged it those first couple days. And mistakes are made. You keep looking at Meredith and not at the second story of a building, not at a window. You keep thinking like a mother watching his child go forward on the street. You keep looking at them. Well, that's the wrong thing. You don't look at your charge. You look at who might bring harm to the charge. And it's just instinctive. You look at a crowd and you look at who's looking at us. Why are they looking at us? Are they planning what our schedule is? Are they moving around depending on where we go? Or are they looking at Meredith just out of curiosity? They want to be there. It's a piece of history. So again, training, it was on-the-job training. Has anybody in the military, in the audience here, have anybody served in the military? Please, your hands. So few of us left these days. You just throw a second lieutenant into the pool And if he survives, he survives. If not, you bring on another one. They're expendable. So again, I picked sharpshooters. I picked military policemen who were veterans and had some degree, I felt some degree of performance professionally, self-control, self-restraint, no trigger happy, no Kent Stake incidences. This was an important event in the eyes of the world around these soldiers. And so luckily I picked the right ones. And in an event in Memphis the night before, that very few units had to undergo was we were separated by the blacks. The blacks had to step back. The night before we went out the gate to Mississippi, Kennedy administration or Justice or the Army felt that the situation on the campus was so incendiary that the snipers in the trees would have been picking out blacks coming in their Army units. But it was a poignant moment. 1962, blacks had found a home in the Army. The large part of our leadership, non-commissioned officers, were African American. One captain was a black officer. Stepped back, shamed, couldn't go to Mississippi with us. By Wednesday of that day, Meredith looked at me and he said, "Sir, Lieutenant, where are your Negro soldiers? You surely must have some." Well, I sent that line up through the command, and they brought the black soldiers down and reintegrated into us. So, but I picked people in the patrol who had at least some common sense and experience, but we've never had a bodyguarding experience in that sense, to answer your question. Please. Sir.
Has anybody who participated in the riots ever expressed any sense of embarrassment?
Embarrassment?
Yes.
I did not have enough time to finish what I wanted to do. I wanted to have an appendix at the back of my book. I put ads in the Macomb, Mississippi newspaper. So neutral. My name is so-and-so. I'm writing a book. I was sent down to Mississippi in 1962 by the Army, and I saw that there was a lot of emotion on the other side of this issue. I'd like to talk to some of you. I'd like to put your remarks in my book. I didn't have enough time. I got no response from that ad, by the way. But had I gone further, gone into Alabama and Georgia, sure, I probably could have come up with some of them. I'm trained as a lawyer to ask neutral questions: who, how, where, when, what. Sir, I don't care about your racist tendencies or your view on segregation at the time, but give me your story. It would have added a bit more texture, I think, to my book. To answer your question, I think very few people have come forward, in a public forum at least, and expressed their views, whether they've changed their views or not. There are a lot of them have not. I would have wanted to have them interviewed as well. It would have helped out at the end of my book as an appendix. Ma'am.
Have you spoken with Meredith?
Have I spoken with, from time to time, yes. He's gone he's gone on his way. University of Mississippi has gone on its way. He is an interesting character. He's written a book this last summer, again, sort of revisiting why he did what he did. Courageous guy. Ma'am.
I first just want to say I commend you for writing this book. I commend you for writing this
Thank
book.
you.
I think so often we focus on the horrible things that happen, which are important to share. But I think it's also important for people who actually did something to share their stories as well. My parents my family lived in Alabama for generations, and my godfather was one of the Department of Justice employees who
Oh.
was as a student, and I grew up hearing their stories.
Sure.
But I very rarely hear in a public forum individuals, just ordinary citizens, talking about what they did. And I think it's important to share those stories so that we can learn from that and know that you can do something, and you can make a difference, and you can inform the public discourse, not just kowtow to the few or the majority who are influencing negatively. So my question to you is, do you know of any effort that's going on to collect the stories of people just ordinary people who were involved and did something?
Sure. 10 years ago, at the 40th anniversary There was an oral history project for those who returned to Ole Miss. And they were marshals, soldiers, students, faculty. So I think the repository of that written word is on the campus of the University of Mississippi. And researchers are probably, and clearly at hand, for them to go through and do that. Let me comment a little bit about what gets news and what doesn't get the news. My first event was here in Washington 2 months ago at, of all places, an Alzheimer's group. And I felt strange going into the room, but I did talk about my story, about 20 men around tables. And one man was agitated to the point because we threw some point of humor in there and he did not like it. And he said, I tell you, I was down there. I was down there as a lawyer working with the radio stations in Jackson on the blacks and the whites. We were trying to reach some accommodation, trying to reach some sort of meeting point. And this is the first I'd heard of it. Now, of course, my mission that month was not reaching out to blacks and whites in a radio station in Jackson. We had the bad guys to go after. But unfortunately, those kinds of events don't get the publicity that they should. Right-minded people, good-minded, well-minded people seeking some accommodation. Not unlike what happened 3-4 weeks ago on the election night at Ole Miss. One newspaper reporter had called it a race riot, racist riot, occurring by the students. Well, it was not that. Anti-Obama students, pro-Romney students came out onto the campus and demonstrated their right, they can do that, against the results of the election. And a handful of students were screaming out racial slurs. Putting that in context, then the next day, 3 times that amount of people showed up for a candlelight ceremony, protesting the incident the night before. So Mississippi was, Mississippi is moving on. But yes, you're right. There's more and more that should come out and talk about it, so you can get a balanced picture that their view of the South may not be the correct view today. It's not just a bunch of rioters throwing bricks. Thank you. John.
Henry, could you talk a little more about the special security detail that you had following your initial?
Sure.
And how, I assume you were just chosen for that. But do you know why you were chosen for that?
Well, I'd gone through the.
How did it end?
Yeah, I'd gone through. Thank you. I was the lead jeep in my battalion from Fort Dix, New Jersey. Once we landed, a lead jeep to go down to Oxford. We were not prepared. My colonel looked at me and said, do your best. No map. This is after I asked him about a map. A map? You asked the Army for a map. Armies have maps. They have maps of Central Europe where the Russian tanks will come across. They have a map of all the park benches, the fire hydrants. We did not have a map to get from Memphis Naval Air Station down to Oxford, Mississippi. Do your best, he said. So I looked out. My brother had been an enlisted man in the Army, and he said, whatever you do as a second lieutenant, don't show indecision. Just make an order, make a decision, and move with it. So I grabbed my driver and a radio operator and looked out across one of President Eisenhower's new interstates going alongside of the camp, and I saw a Phillips 66 gas station. Well, there's the rest of the story. I grabbed him, went over and walked in, full battle gear, gas mask, pistol, everything else, up into this midnight shift gas station, filling station operator. Can I have a map of Mississippi? One that just shows a little edge of Memphis up here. He jumped off the stool, scattered around behind the counter, and gave me a map. Out the door I went. So that was preparation number 1. We did at least have a map, and the lead jeep for 640 military policemen, 140 vehicles. At least the driver in the lead jeep and his lieutenant has a map. Crossing into the base, I noticed that there was a shore patrolman working the midnight shift at the gate of that camp. No one was coming in. A few cars were coming in. I told my driver, "Run, stop, let's move over and ask this
Navy guy how to get down to Mississippi. Well, we put the map out on the hood, and he had a flashlight and showed us, yes, sir, you go down this line here, and you get to the state line, take Highway 78, you're going to get it, you're going to get it. Well, I felt okay, got back in the Jeep, and then one of those things hits you. I gave him a name of Gerald. I did not know his name. I hope he reads this book, or his grandchildren read the book, and let him know. I went back to him, and I said, Gerald, look, we're just a bunch of Yankees from the North. I know you're Navy and I'm Army, but you got to help us out. Yes, sir. I'll show you again. No, don't show me, Gerald. Gerald, you're coming with us. And his eyes popped out. He said, sir, I can't do that. I'll be AWOL. Besides, you're Army, I'm Navy. Gerald, again, the voice of my brother, just make a decision. Get in the Jeep, under orders from President Kennedy. Well, military policemen, if nothing else, are trained to nudge. And my driver was bigger than Gerald, so he was nudged up into the back of my Jeep. So we raced back into the base, and 140 vehicles, the headlights just looking at me, ready to go out the gate. And I had that mixed emotions. I had more assurance now, more insurance in how to get to Oxford, but I also felt I had just kidnapped somebody. Anyway, 5 minutes later, 20 minutes later, we went out the gate to Mississippi. And down the road, met some resistance. Tennessee Highway Patrol escorted us up to the state line. I saw this big sign, Mississippi, welcome to the Magnolia State. And I was sort of looking around for Mississippi Highway Patrol. Well, aren't they going to pick us up and take us to there? Well, I did not know this. Until 6 hours later, I did not know that they had totally walked off their performance of their duties, totally left the state of Mississippi in further insurrection, cleared the campus in further insurrection. Made our way down a 2-lane highway, ultimately reported to a general officer. And when you're a second lieutenant in the military, boy, you barely show up and reporting to a lieutenant colonel. And here was a general officer with a star on each shoulder. And he said, Lieutenant, I want you to take a platoon of soldiers down to the Lyceum and put out the riots. Units have been there already, then go downtown. And so I didn't want to ask him anything. It's like a chief executive officer of a corporation giving a lowly employee an order. You don't say, well, excuse me, sir, may I ask you a few questions? No, you don't do that. You just hope the secretary, the executive secretary, is lurking out in the hallway that can tell you a little bit about the order you've just been given. Well, I said, yes, sir, and out the door of this little airport confine. And as I was walking back to my Jeep, a lieutenant colonel or major came up and provided me all the details. The Lyceum, well, I didn't even know what a Lyceum was. It turned out to be the major administration building for the university. So I went through a series of I was on a recon of 3 Jeeps trying to get back to the battalion out on the highway. We got lost. We got hit by the rioters. Made my way back. Went back through this backyard of this old lady who was by then 4 in the morning standing out screaming at us all. I had gone through her backyard with my 3 Jeep convoy, made it out to the highway, found the battalion, had these orders from the general, and were ready to go back in toward the campus. But I wanted to retrace my steps, and I did. Retrace my steps through that lady's side yard, that side driveway. I stood out on Connecticut Avenue one time trying to measure how long it takes for 140 vehicles to pass one point, going 14, 15 miles an hour. I think it probably took an hour for our battalion, the Yankees from New Jersey, to arrive in the South through that old lady's backyard. But a few minutes later, maybe an hour later, I had gone over to where the command was in the Armory, and my colonel came out and said, you're going to be the security officer for James Meredith. And then I handpicked the best I could find. Sharpshooters, self-control, and we were not to be too close to Meredith. We were to be 30 seconds of him, and by radio. And I've often said that we could only catch the killer. We really couldn't prevent harm to him because, again, he was allowed to freely walk across the campus back and forth. So that's how it was called the Peanut Patrol.
hardly something of ferocious like bear or tiger or this and that, but a camo person came by the first day and he said, well, what are you going to call your patrol? You have to have a name for it for radio purposes. And Vince Farrell, Providence College, 1961, was reading a Peanuts cartoon from the local newspaper. And he said, well, call yourself the Peanut Patrol, and you'll be Peanut 1, 2, 3, 4, and that was it. A week later, Cuban Missile Crisis occurred, swept everything else off the news, and I read a telegram from the Pentagon that my unit would be deployed at a certain embarkation point in South Carolina along with the 82nd Airborne and the 101st, but the Peanut Patrol would stay in place. So it became part of Pentagon lore. A long, convoluted answer to your question, but that was it. Please.
You alluded to the fact that you selected, Henry, your particular team. And I have not encountered that. I've gone on, as you know, to work in disasters around the world after our time in Vietnam with both the U.S. military and the UN. I've never seen another situation where the unit commander gets to actually pick for a sensitive mission like this the right people. So you didn't have a chance to take it.
I did, yeah.
Does that, I don't believe that exists anymore.
Well, you go to the first sergeant and you say, this is my assignment. Please select, because they knew more than I did about their own men, and I had a whole battalion to pick from. So we were able to get some pretty good people. Generally, they did their duty. Nobody lost their cool. We had one or two close incidents thereafter in front of the cafeteria. I found out while they hated the marshals, the deputy marshals, the civilians running around in blue suits, they had a regard for us because we wore a uniform, part of the tradition of the South, patriotism first. So they didn't give us too much trouble, but once in a while they did. But it was, again, the book is dedicated to my battalion members because they were an army out of place and they performed so well.
What I'm trying to say, though, is I'm not sure that would be the case today.
No.
In a patrol reform today, somebody would say the following individuals will go down under Lieutenant Gallagher.
Yes.
Some guy behind the desk would decide that.
That's right. That's right.
Have that same kind of dirty dozen.
I think so. I think you're right.
And that's a weakness.
It would be corporate. Yes, ma'am.
I don't have a question, but a comment. I grew up in Pennsylvania, in conservative Lancaster County, but I was living in Gulfport, Mississippi at the time of this incident.
Yeah.
And I learned in Mississippi that I was a Yankee, and it was not a complimentary term. I've never thought of it being applied to me before.
That's right.
In the North, I just never thought about being a Yankee. But we didn't talk out loud very much because our accents would have displayed us as Yankees.
Sure.
The tension was tremendous. So we just kept a very low profile and listened, and it was a horrible time.
Yeah. If you have anybody seen the movie Help or read the book, that reflects and shows some of the culture at the time. I think President Kennedy said, why Mississippi, of all places? Why couldn't it be Georgia, which had a little bit of a liberal tradition that was growing, a little, maybe Alabama, but the deepest of the deep South states, Mississippi? Well, James Meredith, wasn't picked by a group, by a committee, by anybody. He just wanted to go to school. And later on, the Army caught up with what he was doing, Justice Department caught up, the administration caught up. Well, who is this guy? What is he doing? So there's that bravery. We had to play catch up. Very brave guy. I did not. I was in a cocoon those 6 months I spent down there, so I didn't have a chance to go off campus and talk with the locals and see that. But again, there's the square, William Faulkner's Square, down in middle of Oxford. Blacks sat at one end, self-segregation. Whites were at the other end. I don't know if it still happens that way, but if you were an African American in 1962 and you had any business to do on the square, you better be about your business quickly. Go to the bank, no loitering,
No hanging around talking to each other. Get your job done and move on. If you tried on a hat in Nielsen's department store, it was your hat. You bought it. That kind of a culture. When the Army has this kind of an assignment, humor breaks out every time, and thank God for the Army humorists. One of our black officers says, "Hey, look, I'm in the front of the bus." He jumped onto a bus. "I'm in the front of the bus, and I'm in Mississippi." Daily, that kind of survival humor, if you will, because it was boring. It was boring, except for those first moments of tension during the riots, and then tension later on when he would be moving from class to class, and we would spot a car that shouldn't be there, someone dressed that didn't look like a student. But other than that, there's a lot of flat time and a lot of boredom, and thank God again for humor. One New Yorker said, "I wish that Mississippi should really be like a foreign state. I mean, they should have, like Canada, different license plates and cigarettes and soda pops so we can recognize, maybe different stamps." And this is a man who couldn't wait to get back to New Jersey when the plane landed. They all kissed the ground. And he couldn't wait. He said, I knew the nightmare was not over until I saw the word New York on the Holland Tunnel. Thank you. Thank you. Good.
Well, of course, I want to thank Henry for not only writing the book, but coming here to share his stories with us, and thank the audience, which came from many different areas, for sharing this experience. We had an educational experience together, at least we did. I went in the Army the year after Henry was in the Army as a second lieutenant, and I was quite removed from this world entirely, but I can understand in part your motives and have some feeling for your own idealism, which obviously has shown through. And I actually, when Tom asked the question earlier, I had the same idea. What was it, when in your career did you realize that this was something that you wanted to share and for a purpose? And the purpose was to educate others about a situation from which so many of us were isolated, including other second lieutenants. We're going to move to, you'll have a chance to talk more with Henry at the book signing, which is going to be out in the foyer. The books are for sale at a special Library of Congress discount, and we're just very pleased that you're able to join us, and you can talk more with Henry at that time. So let's conclude with another round of applause, and you can speak with him out in the foyer.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.